All right. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday, especially those on the East Coast. Things are winding down, and welcome to this week's edition of our legal case management jam session. My name is Emery. I'm one of the co-founders of Confido Legal. We're an embedded payments platform specifically designed to allow legal tech companies to embed payments into their applications and law firms to embed payments into their workflows. So we see a lot of different technology sitting where we do. And so always exciting to talk about what's new out there and how firms can better leverage that technology. Today, super excited to be talking to Lindsey Corbin. It's always great to connect with her. She is the founder of Delegate Legal, which helps firms in many different ways delegate some of their work. One of the things she does is help firms set up their technology solutions, which will be the focus of today. I will also give a little shout out to a classic Financially Legal episode that she did a few years ago. It has really withstood the test of time, and it's all focused on delegation. So if you really want to dive, we probably won't get in too deep to that today, but if you want to get deep into how to really run an efficient practice, that's a great episode. So go check it out. So super excited, like I said, to have Lindsey here. We're going to be talking about how as a firm, how do you identify, you've identified some problem. Things are breaking down. It's time to upgrade. It's time to get new technology, new case management, new CRM at your firm. Where do you start kind of identifying those features that are important in an upgrade? Because it can be extremely overwhelming to do that. So I want to turn it over to Lindsey for a little bit of an intro that I'm sure will be way better than mine. But you can talk a little bit about what she does, and then also sort of tell us a little bit about, Lindsey, your relationship to this problem.
Right.
Been down in the trenches and seen it from so many different angles. Tell us a little bit about that. But please introduce yourself first.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Emery. As you mentioned, I'm Lindsey Corbin. My company is Delegate Legal. And we started in the middle of the pandemic back in July of 2020 as a virtual paralegal firm. So we support traditionally small firms and solo practitioners on the paralegal side, typically in the IP space, patents, trademarks, and copyrights. But because we ourselves are a virtual firm, we work with virtual firms, we've developed a practice area of helping firms set up and manage their virtual components, right? So their tech stack, their staffing, their phones, mail, anything that helps them work remotely, work from wherever they want to work from. If it's the beach, their house, internationally, that happens as well. And so we will frequently get consulted on to help them set that up. Or if it's already set up, what can they optimize and make more efficient? If a system just isn't quite working, is there something that might be better? And so that's where we come in, and we, typically consult with a few firms each year and are definitely getting a bigger and bigger increase as the landscape is changing for the legal field in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many options out there. Even, obviously there's the legal specific options, but we're definitely run into a lot of practices that have kind of industry agnostic tools as well that they've kind of brought in. So what are some typical signs maybe that you've seen at firms that it's time for an upgrade? Like what's the precursor to this whole thing?
So as one would expect, cost, right? Cost is a big part of it. These systems in general are not cheap, and they all have, while I would argue that they all have some of the same functionality, there might be the same 10 things that every system can do. It's all about how they package it and how they price it. And so the first call that we usually get is, my overhead is getting out of control. How can I reduce it? How can I manage what I'm doing better to save $100 a month, $200 a month, whatever it might look like? How can we most optimize that? So that's the first thing that's the problem, is the cost. The second thing is, in our experience, clients are getting more and more savvy. Clients want to be able to interact with their attorneys, but not always in a pick up the phone traditional manner or send an email in and let it go into the abyss. So we are seeing a rise in client portals and firms who are responding to that demand from their clients. Clients want to know the status of their case. They want to know when they might receive a response, setting that boundary. And so client portals are becoming a big part of it. And then, of course, the chat bots, the interactive, having somebody on the other end. And I like to also group that in with text messaging that firms are also rolling out. It's the being able to stay on top of the needs of your client and their communication style as much as you doing what best works for you and your firm so you can maintain that relationship. So that's what we see a lot of, and when firms want to make a change.
So kind of what I'm hearing is either the operating expenses are getting out of control, or clients are kind of demanding better communication channels, and those are kind of the two big drivers of looking for a new system. So
yeah, I think so.
Got it. Well, as we were preparing for this, Lindsey told, I think, a pretty interesting story about someone transitioning from big law to starting their own practice. I think it's probably illustrates some of what's at stake here. I don't know if you're open to telling that here, but I thought I think our listeners would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So I think if we, take a step back and look at a higher level, the gist of it, and I think this applies to most attorneys in a big firm who likely someday wake up and maybe aren't as happy as they used to be, or maybe the partner compensation is changing. I've actually heard from a lot of attorneys recently that partner compensation across the board is changing completely, and firms are changing it. I don't know why. I can't even, potentially give a reason for why, but it's simply happening. And so this is causing attorneys with large books of business to say, wait a second, I'm not really being rewarded for my efforts. Surely I can do something different. So then they think about leaving the big firm and wanting to start their own firm. Now, one of the main differences, and this all goes to this, situation, is when you show up at a big firm, everything is handed to you essentially, right? You're not worrying about your email, your billing system, your docketing system, anything. Somebody simply trains you on the systems that the firm has in place. But when you go to set up your own firm, that's all you've known. And you are now looking at it from a different lens of, oh, I have to make the decisions. What's going to work best for me? And so it can be overwhelming when you look at all the systems that are out there. And sometimes you might reach for the stars and you pick a system and you're not willing to accept feedback on that system. Let's be clear. So you pick a system that is set up for a large enterprise. It has components of Salesforce, perhaps, maybe not. It has, it's geared toward 100 users. There's all kinds of scenarios. And so you pick these systems thinking that you want to be set up for growth without really focusing on the present. And so you get some of these larger systems that are very expensive. They can sometimes require a third-party implementation specialist. And the software company isn't telling you that. They want to make the deal. They want to close the new contract. So they're not always going to tell you that it's not an out-of-the-box system. Yeah. And so, in the situation that I'm thinking of, it's trying to explain to a lawyer who is successful, he's got a big book of business, he's ready to go on his own, that maybe his first choice isn't the best choice, inevitably falls on deaf ears. And so you have to let it happen. And, you hope that it works out. But if it doesn't, the good news is there are so many other options, and all of them are less expensive that you'll get there. And, when it comes to picking these big systems, the one thing that I cautioned was it might be great for you right now because you are tech savvy, you know what you're doing, you have a vision for your firm. But my concern is everyone else in your firm that doesn't have that same perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to bring in and grow your firm from just you to 20 attorneys to 40 attorneys, somebody has to train them. Somebody has to know how to properly convey the inner workings of the practice management system. And if you don't have somebody that can do that, or you don't have the right tools, then that's just not going to succeed no matter what you try.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to have user adoption.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So whether we're talking about the attorney who's coming from big law going out on their own, or maybe it's even a team that's been operating, a small team that's been operating together for a while, but has realized it's time, for an upgrade. Like, where do you start? There's so many features and possible things that you could focus on. What's step one in that process?
So we approach it the same way that we approach when a firm hires us on the delegating side, right? So we have that attorney, or the attorney that hires us, or the office manager, whomever it is, write down a list of the top 5 things that they do every day, right? So are they spinning their wheels entering time? Are they spinning their wheels, marketing? Do they want to be able to draft more, in our case, trademark applications? So we want them to think about everything that they do in a day and then decide what they don't want to do, because you can delegate the rest of that. So when you look at a practice management system, they all have, the same 10 features, but then all of them offer something that's just a little bit different. So one system interacts with Constant Contact really easily to help with your marketing. Somebody else interacts, I think it's with HubSpot. I'm probably wrong on that one, but we'll use that for a minute. So you can do your marketing through that channel. So then when you're building out your practice management, you're putting all your contacts in, you're now incorporating other systems to have it all in one place. So you're not using 5 systems in a row. So if you think about what's most important to you, is having your newsletter functionality built in super important to you, so you don't have to export your contacts and build it in a separate system? Yep. Okay, so that's what you need to put on your importance list. Because once you get through those 10 identical features, then you start breaking off into the little things. Is text messaging an important one? I'm now seeing that in certain practice areas, text messaging has become such a huge component of the way they interact with their clients. I know it's huge in family law. You've got family law attorneys running every direction, and their clients are typically emotional. They are, they feel so strongly in their case. They want their hands to be held. And so they like that text messaging. They like that feeling that they can just pick up their phone and get a response on the other end. So maybe that's important for your practice area. So you would want to look at a system that offered that. What about client portals? And I know that there are third-party client portals that are now integrated into practice management systems. And so, but I don't believe that those systems are in every practice management system. So you want to look at those in particular to see, okay, we really want a client portal to keep all the documents there. Do you want, easier? I think there are a few that have, so I'm going to use NetDocs, for example, but NetDocs isn't really a full practice management system, but you can drag and drop to save your documents. So is that something, because maybe you're in a document heavy practice, a lot of litigation, a lot of discovery, where you want to be able to drag and drop. So it's all these things. What about call logs, right? A lot of them offer call logging. So it's more about me working with the client to say, what is most important to you? Because once you identify your must-haves, then you can put the system in place that has those. And maybe it has 9 out of 10 that you want. Maybe it has all 10. Or maybe you're willing to concede because it has 8 out of 10, but the price is right. So that's the first step, is really getting the attorney to think about what is the most important part for them. And that can be difficult for some attorneys coming from big law that haven't really had to think about the most important parts.
Interesting. Especially about the text messaging. I've definitely seen that, but and it makes total sense in family law. So it's so hard to say out of context. So this is totally an unfair question, but I'm going to put you on the spot anyway. Do you have just sort of an overarching opinion on? There seems to be kind of like two schools of thought in the case management world. One is I'm going to be kind of all in one. You're going to do everything from accounting to CRM all in one system. Mm-hmm. And then the other school of thought is, we're just going to be really good at integrations. And, like you mentioned, you're going to pull in HubSpot or Constant mm-hmm. Contact or something like that. Do you have an overarching opinion on one versus the other? Or you can also just say pass if it's not fair.
I think it's personal preference. I'll just speak to what we do, which is we go with integrations. So we have a practice management system that we use, but we integrate with 3 or 4 other systems at the same time. Now, our practice is a little bit different. Obviously, we're not a law firm, but we operate very similarly to one. And we happen to run on Clio. But for example, one of the things with Clio that people really love is the QuickBooks integration. I actually turned it off. It didn't work for us because of the way that we were sending out bills and the way that we needed our bookkeeper to reconcile that. So we have a QuickBooks subscription and we have a Clio subscription, and they're not connected. But, and then payment processing is also a really big one. People they have very strong opinions on payment processing built into CRMs. Having been through a few different things, that's a really big one. So I also think it comes down to how confident are you as the attorney or as the office manager of the firm with technology, just in general. If you are good, not great, then to me, an all-in-one package makes perfect sense, because then you're not fumbling through different systems. My team is very lucky that my number 2 is a tech person first, right? I've since trained her in trademarks and trained her in operations, but technology is her first love and her background. So because of that, we know how to make every system talk to each other. So we pay for a ton of, I'm blanking on the word at the moment, but like an automation link between systems. So when she clicks one button, it does it to the other. But not everybody's set up for that. So I think it's a little bit of self-awareness on the part of the firm to decide what's going to work for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a great measuring stick to, or litmus test, I guess, to decide, which direction to go there. Because I know there's definitely definitely two schools of thought there.
Yep.
Awesome. So kind of first step is really just kind of going down this list and saying, what's important to me? What do I want? I guess the thing that maybe is probably important to point out is all this is happening before you're going out and doing demos and things like that. So you don't get sucked into what maybe other people want you to think is important as opposed to what you think is important. So,
right. I think it's important to just do a little bit of cursory research on your own. Maybe make yourself a chart of things that you like. And then that also, when you start doing demos, use your notes, right? You've got this most knowledgeable person of that product on the other end. So it's the perfect time to ask the very pointed direction, right? We're going to talk about payment processing for a minute. If you are looking at options, I think it's the perfect opportunity to say, are you planning on raising rates in the next 6 months? Right? I've been through that. It came out of nowhere. So you don't want to sign up with somebody, or are you saying, can I sign a contract for 12 months in agreement for you not raising my payment processing rates, right? I mean, so if you make notes ahead of time, talking to these software providers can get you those answers. And even if it's, are you going to raise your annual subscription fee, right? That's, I think collectively as a group, we get annoyed when that email comes out. I'm going to harp on just QuickBooks for a minute. I don't know how much QuickBooks even costs me at this moment, but I feel like every 6 months I get a new, we're raising your subscription because we're offering you more features. No, you're not. You're just raising my subscription because you can, because I'm not going to go anywhere else, right? So that's the type of thing that I really feel like when you look at practice management systems, make your notes first, talk to the sales team, think about what's going to make the most financial sense for you, because in that moment, you don't have a paying client yet.
Yeah.
You have clients that are probably going to pay you, and you hope they're going to pay you, but that likely hasn't happened. And so you're probably working from a nest egg out of the gate, and you want to be conservative with your money.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually just this morning talking to a firm that was taking an interesting approach, which probably isn't, not every firm needs to do this or has the resources to do this, but they basically took their most important processes, kind of boxed them up and paid to do kind of like a mini project where, the folks doing the implementation and had to work with the case management company to kind of develop a proof of concept. And I have a hard time believing that wouldn't be money well spent to get, those answers, to see it in action, especially if if that's like your critical process, to see that. So I thought that would just be an interesting thing to bring up as an alternative to just having to dive right into the software headlong.
Well, and I think too, so I'd be really curious to see how that goes, because I think there are certain practice areas that really lend themselves to formula. I would say litigation is not one of them, but yet there are litigation softwares that exist that will spit out, draft interrogatories or draft requests for admissions, right, to save that step from the attorney. And so everything is changing on a day-to-day. But I do think there are practice areas that are so formulaic that you can create a practice management system just for that practice area that would say, intake, trademark application, step 1, docketing, just wait for it to play out. Office action gets issued, step 2. And then it's just very systematic that would then also have different features built in just for that specific practice area. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out, if it works well for them, because it makes sense.
Yeah. I just, especially the bigger you get, there's so many unknowns. I've definitely, and I'm sure you've witnessed this before too, but seen some total train wrecks trying to implement software when, not enough due diligence was done beforehand.
Right. Well, and nobody likes to admit when they're wrong. I mean, that's just a human thing.
You got the sunk costs. You're halfway through it.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, let's try and make this work. And the answer is, it probably can't. And that's okay. So you just have to cut your losses. It's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
And then try to get your data out too. I mean, I think that companies are better, but nobody wants to lose a client and to have to hand over all their data or make it easy for them to export. So I think that's a big deal as well. There's a well-known docketing system that makes exporting data virtually impossible, even if the two law firms have the exact same system, but if you move your work from one law firm to the other using the same system, they do not support that. And so it's kind of just known in the industry. And so everybody kind of just makes their peace with it. But to me, that's a perfect example of why do we have to make this so difficult?
Oh man. Awesome. Well, I want to be cognizant of time. We're coming up on half an hour here. Really interesting kind of strategies to identify some of these things early on. Anything else you'd say on this topic, Lindsey, that's important for firms to know, kind of on the, early on in the process as they're kind of thinking what's important to me?
So for me, it's this idea that Rome wasn't built in a day. So when you start your firm, while you have an idea of how you want it to go, you don't have to get there right away. And it is okay to start day one if you want to run on a spreadsheet, because that works for you until you get, 5 clients and then can justify the cost. And also don't be afraid. So there are practice management systems that will convince you that you need to buy seats for everybody on your team. There are workarounds to that. There are things like co-counsel features where you can just add people on matters and they can add in their time. If you have a billing login, if you have other things. So just caution signing up for the first, pretty system that gets in front of you. Make sure that you've asked all your questions and that it's okay to not be okay with that decision. Like you can get 6 months into it and decide that maybe this is too much, or maybe it's not enough because you've just grown by leaps and bounds. So that's okay.
Yeah. Yep. You can always go back and get a do-over.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned, kind of going down the list and seeing what features are important to you. I'll give a little plug for our legal case management hub that we have at confidolegal.com/LCM. And I'll drop the link in the chat here, but it's got a little bit of a worksheet where you can identify what's important to you and gives you at least a decent place to start and identify those things. If you really want some expert help, then consider talking to Lindsey. And I'll let Lindsey, maybe you can do a little bit of a plug for Delegate Legal and how folks can get a hold of you.
Sure. Yep. So we are happy to help with tech stack consulting, of course, virtual paralegal work. You can reach me at lindsey@delegate.legal. And I'm here to help. And so is my team. Nikki, who's on my team, is great with the technology work. She really dives in and really prides herself on setting our clients up for success.
Awesome. Well, we'll also drop your website as well in the comments so folks can get a hold of you. And we'll let especially the East Coast folks like you move on to their weekend. So thank you all for joining. And we'll be back here doing more legal case management jam sessions in the future.
Thank you.